Welcome to week 7, REL 2930. We're going to get right into it today. We're going to move past theology into some church history now. But before we do that, just some housekeeping, as usual. The survey. If you haven't already done so, please follow the link. I sent it on my announcements. I'll probably send it again. There's a little SurveyMonkey survey, which has 5 questions. Basically, I'm asking about how effective the different parts of the class are, at least the ones that I can change. So there's a question about the exams, there's a question about the discussion boards, the exam question assignments, the lectures. Um, really do value your feedback a lot on this. If you've already taken it, thank you. If you haven't taken it yet, please do. I'm going to leave it up through the midterm week, and then if I need to act on anything, I will certainly give you plenty of notice, because I am not opposed to making changes based on this. Like, for example, I know there's been a lot of nervousness about the exam questions. I'm looking for ways to make that better. I think I think I mentioned week 1, it was kind of an experimental thing. Unfortunately, you're getting someone who's never taught a Canvas course before, you're getting a lot of experimental things, and I do apologize for that. I'm trying to make the experience as beneficial as I can, but obviously not perfect in that, and will make mistakes. So thank you for being patient with me. But I will, if I get strong enough feedback to move in a particular direction and make changes, I will. So take the survey. Thank you if you've already done so, and you will be hearing from me based on what's going to come from that. Yeah, we'll make those changes. But anyway, we have this week's material, and then we have the midterm next week. So here's what's going to happen. I'll send you a sheet either probably early this week, in which I explain in a little bit more detail what the midterm is going to look like, because I know it's another source of anxiety here, what the thing's going to look like. So I will put out a sheet beforehand that walks you through each section of the midterm, what to expect, what to look for. I will give you basically my testing philosophy, because I don't want to, my goal is not to be tricky. I don't want you to fail this. I want you to do well. I want you to succeed, and I want to help you do that. So I will send out material before the midterm. You won't just walk cold into the midterm not knowing what I'm expecting. I will make sure that doesn't happen. So, okay? Hopefully that'll put your mind at ease a little bit. Some of you, I know, like I said, one of the frustrations of online is I can't read your faces. Usually I can read faces and get a sense of when something's wrong in a classroom, but I don't have that capacity here. So I really need you to be proactive and talk to me, send me messages, come see me, whatever it is, if you need help. So, okay, so today is Church History Day. We covered a lot of theology last week. We're going to go a lot less today. One of the consistent points of feedback I've gotten on the essays are the lectures are interesting, but they're too long. I just can't stick with you. And you know what? Staring at a computer screen, I get that. So I'm really going to try to keep it keep it the main thing, and not get sidetracked as much as I can. So we'll see if I can do that. Start then with the history. McGrath starts with the patristic period, but he makes mention of the fact that the apostolic period was even before that. The period that's really chronicled in the book of Acts. You have Peter and Paul as the 2 primary church starters, if you will, both of them planting and leading churches. Obviously 2 different audiences there. Peter to more of a Jewish audience. Paul, although a Jew, to more of a Gentile audience. And his call is pretty famous. I won't spend too much time talking about it, but his call to the Gentiles is the initial impetus to get Christianity beyond being just a sect of Judaism and being its own distinct thing. Both have similar fates. Both die at the hands of Romans, and that's going to be a pretty common theme today. Tradition tells us that Peter was crucified upside down. He was going to be crucified right side up, protested and said, "I am not worthy to die the way that my Lord died," and was crucified upside down instead. At least that's what tradition says. It's a little bit less clear as far as what happened to Paul. Most scholars tend to think that he was a victim of the reign of Nero, and was beheaded then, but there are differences of opinion on that. But anyway, the church formation process, these are 2 giants in that process, and obviously there are many others. McGrath, and one thing I love about this week's reading from McGrath is he takes pains to show the effect and the effect that women had on this process, and the fact that the church was dealing with, the church specialized in reaching to the margins, to the people that weren't respected in society for whatever reason. And in the ancient patriarchal society, that was a big category. So McGrath points out, and focus on that reading because it's really good, how women were able to find a sense of identity and a sense of empowerment in a church setting that was denied to them in other sectors of life and society. And you have people like Priscilla, and you have New Testament even mentions quite a few prominent females who assist Paul in the work that he does, and Paul mentions them in his letters, and it's there's a bit of a tension there because you have this space for women to contribute and to lead, but then you have a patriarchal culture, and as the church becomes more institutionalized in that patriarchal culture, you run into tension there. And those tensions persist to this day. I mean, we're still having the conversations. The church is still having the conversations as far as can women be ordained or not. But that's a very old conversation. It starts in this period, so it's several thousands of years old. But McGrath is right, I think, to lead our attention beyond where we usually pay attention to, and say, you know what, there were a lot of people, in particular a lot of women, who were making this process happen. It wouldn't have happened without them. But the church obviously grows in the context of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is a very insecure empire, and here's what I mean by that. The Christians ran into trouble basically because they wouldn't play by the rules. The expectation for citizens of the Roman Empire was to pay homage, the terminology pay homage, to worship, essentially, Caesar as Lord. And the saying and the way in which you did that was, you presented your offerings and you said the mantra, Caesar is Lord. Christians in the early church weren't willing to say that. They said, you know what, there is only one Lord and Caesar's not him. Their mantra, their pledge, their identification marker was Jesus as Lord. So they wouldn't offer incense. Why is that a problem? Why, are they just being weird? No, the Romans thought they were actually being traitorous. They were being insidious. Why? Because paying homage to Caesar was not just a religious activity, it was also a highly political activity in the Roman Empire. And McGrath, again, I direct your attention to McGrath, the bottom of page 124. He talks about why this was. It wasn't just a religious act to pay homage to Caesar, it was a political act, in that you were basically declaring your solidarity with the Roman Empire. You were acknowledging Caesar's divinity, wishing him well, and by extension, wishing the Roman Empire well as well. A lot of wells. Christians couldn't do that. They couldn't say Caesar is Lord. So the implication was they're not fully on board with the common good, with the well-being of the Roman state. They are undercutting that. And this is a theme that would come up again and again and again, where they wouldn't be, they couldn't pay homage to the national, because Caesar was a form of a national god. They couldn't do that. And without getting too deep into the detail here, you have in ancient Rome, and not just in ancient Rome, pretty common in the ancient world, you have a division of labor among the gods. In a lot of polytheistic cultures, you're going to have a division of labor. So in the Roman context, you had personal gods, you had family gods, gods of your household and gods of your family, but you also had national gods. And all these gods had different jurisdictions. The national god didn't necessarily care what was going on in your household, but your household god was for that. And your household god didn't really have the power to affect what was going on in the national sphere, but your national god did that. So there was a division of labor in polytheistic cultures. Christianity is monotheistic. Monoculture. It's monotheistic. There's only one God that does all the stuff. So as a result, national God, family God, personal God, the Christians were like, Yahweh, that's it. There is no more. And they share that with Judaism, of course, but Judaism had found a level of acceptance as a sect in the Roman Empire that Christianity, as the new kid on the block, didn't have. So you have then this division of labor, and part of a good Roman's religious activity and also political activity was to offer homage to Caesar. Christians couldn't do that. So they, in McGrath's words, found it difficult to accept the distinction between public and private religious beliefs, and so they were hated by the larger populace. See, because the family gods and the personal gods were private. I mean, they're relegated to yourself, to your household. And then you participated in the Roman the civil religion, which was Caesar worship. Christianity blends all that together and says there's one God that has jurisdiction over all of that. And as a result, and we've kind of hit on this already, but as a result, the private-public distinctions kind of fade away. Because for a Roman Christian, the fate of the Roman Empire didn't lie in Caesar's hands, it lay in God's hands, just like the fate of their household or their person didn't lie in anybody else's hands but God's. So he's got all the stuff. It's all his. He's in control of all of it. There is no division between the religious beliefs that we hold to be public and the religious beliefs that we hold to be private. The same God rules both those spheres of life. But they definitely ran afoul of the Romans because of that. And the Romans hated them and spread rumors about them and misunderstood them, and in some cases killed them. And you have what this gives rise to, this hostile environment, ironically gives rise to a very fertile setting for the church to grow. Why is that? Well, there's a number of different reasons. We talked about already, we talked about Pliny and Trajan and just some of the growth of the Christian church. The book of Acts makes a reference to the fact that it's a very communal lifestyle. It's a very generous lifestyle. There are places in Roman history where state pagan Roman rulers were looking at these Christians going, not only do they take care of their own widows and orphans, but they take care of ours as well. So you have this little subgroup, this little counterculture, acting really attractive and taking care of those that would, in other circumstances, be left for dead. So you have that element, and then you have the intellectual element. You have people like Justin Martyr, who was around basically early to mid 2nd century AD, or CE, excuse me. He wrote a work called The Apology. And The Apology, people say, what, did he say he was sorry for it? No, The Apology is basically a defense of the faith. Apologetics is a defense of the Christian faith. So the Apology was a defense of the Christian faith in this type of context. You have Roman citizens who are thinking of Christians as weird. They're thinking of Christians as traitorous. They're spreading all these rumors. The very famous one that McGrath makes mention of is the agape feast, the love feast. People say, "Well, are they cannibals? Are they they say, this is my body, this is my blood. Are they eating each other? Are they having like orgies and wild sex rituals? What? Seriously, this was some of the gossip that was circulating about the early church. So you have people like Justin Martyr who stand up to give a defense. And Justin Martyr is interesting because his parents were pagan. And I say that word pagan. Nowadays that word is loaded with connotation. Pagan in the old days just meant country dweller. That's the technical meaning of the word. But in the Roman context, it was basically, do you follow the gods of the Roman civil religion? Including Caesar, not limited to Caesar, but including Caesar. If you are, technically, you're a pagan in that context. And his parents were pagan, and he was too, until he was converted and became a Christian. And as his name suggests, they call him Justin Martyr for a reason. Eventually, he was flogged and beheaded, similar to the Apostle Paul, by the Roman authorities. Sorry, you're seeing my cat in the way here. So Justin Martyr is one of those who rises to give a defense, but as you can see in the end, he is another one that is martyred. And we'll get into the martyrs in just a minute. But let me first just give an explanation, because I asked you to read a little bit of Justin Martyr just to get a flavor. I don't want you to read the whole thing, but I want you to get a piece of the Apology just to get a flavor of it. And here's a quote that really kind of gets to the purpose of why he was doing what he was doing. It is our tasks, our being the apologist, it is our task, therefore, to afford to all an opportunity of inspecting our life and teachings, lest, on account of those who are accustomed to be ignorant of our affairs, we should incur the penalty due to them for mental blindness. And it is your business, yours being the judges and the rulers of the society, it is your business, when you hear us, to be found as reason demands good judges. For if, when you have learned the truth, you do not do what is just, you will be before God without excuse. So Justin's task then is to give a picture of the Christian faith, to give a picture of the life of Christians in Roman society, and to show that they're not the insidious threat that they are often made out to be, to show that the rumors are untrue, and also to look at the leaders and the magistrates and saying, you are persecuting and killing us based on rumors that are not even remotely true. It is your job to be better than that. And in chapter 5, I've asked you to read chapter 3 through 8, I think. In chapter 5, chapters are really short, though. He connects Christians with the fate of Socrates. It's really interesting. He draws an analogy. He says, because the Christians, one of the most common complaints about Christians are atheists. Well, why do you call them atheists? Well, because they don't worship the pantheon of Roman gods. Justin Martyr makes the point that Socrates in ancient Greece got the same exact treatment. Where he looked at the pagan gods, he looked at the gods of the Greek society and said they're basically worthless. They're not real. There's really nothing to them. And he was killed as a result. And Justin makes the comparison that, look, the same thing is happening to us. We are looking at these Roman gods, finding them wanting, finding them empty, finding them non-existent. And you are calling us atheists and you are killing us just like you did with him. So it's an interesting comparison because on the one side you have the state, this polytheistic, pagan, state religious culture, the institutionalized culture. And Justin's point is that the Christians are not the first to look at this type of institutionalized culture, polytheistic culture, and say there's really not much there worth anything. He says we are just following Socrates in that, and just as Socrates was killed, and even was killed, and it was widely acknowledged that it was a mistake for him to be killed. Justin says the same thing for Christians. You're making a mistake when you go after us. But go after them they did. And like I said, Justin was killed, and there are a couple of other, not a couple, there are many, many other Christians who lost their life at the hands of Roman authorities. I've asked you to read snippets of 2 of the stories. The martyrdom of Polycarp, that's a very famous one. Polycarp was an old man, said to be a disciple of St. John, the disciple of Jesus who wrote the gospel that bears his name, or is reported to have. Polycarp is kind of illustrative of this sense of the Romans looking at Christians like they were undercutting Roman society. Because around the time, right before Polycarp was arrested, the area where he was in the Roman Empire experienced a run of natural disasters, plagues, earthquakes, so on and so forth. Now, the Roman citizens there, the ones who were suffering these plagues and disasters, were thinking the reason why we are suffering this, the reason why this is happening to us, is because we have been deficient, we've been lazy, we haven't done a good enough job of getting rid of this new Christianity thing that is threatening our gods, that is taking people away from worshiping our gods. We haven't been really strenuous enough in getting rid of it, so our gods are punishing us by sending plagues, earthquakes, so on and so forth. It's a very similar argument that St. Augustine, and we'll talk about Augustine a little bit, a similar argument to what Augustine had to deal with hundreds of years later. When he wrote The City of God, which is his big magnum opus, this massive work, the reason he wrote City of God was because he's writing at the fall of the Roman Empire. And there are people around him still making this argument. The reason Rome fell is because we turned away from our old pagan gods in favor of this Christianity nonsense, and now this Christianity nonsense is leading to our destruction. This is the reason why the Roman Empire weakened and fell. And Augustine has to answer that. And he has to say, no, this is not what's going on at all. Let me illustrate what's going on. Same thing going on with Polycarp here. He is a bishop. He is a church leader. He is successful. Christianity is growing underneath his leadership where he is. The area there experiences natural disasters, and the Roman citizens look at him and say, okay, we are getting punished for not getting rid of him. So he is arrested. He is brought forth before the people. And he is given an opportunity, as is often the case with the martyrs, he is given an opportunity to renounce Christ, to deny him, and to pay homage to the emperor. Remember, he's an old man, and in the Roman authorities even say, look, take account of your age. You're not a spring chicken anymore. Are you really sure you want to go through this? And his response is quite interesting. If you look at chapter 9, sections 2 and 3, starting with the words of his captors, swear by the genius of Caesar, in other words, pay homage to Caesar, repent and say, away with the atheist. Remember here, atheist is a reference to Christians because the Romans, polytheistic Romans, thought that they were atheists because they didn't worship a God that could be seen. They worshipped an invisible God, and to the Romans, an invisible God was no God at all. Then Polycarp, with solemn countenance, looked upon the whole multitude of lawless heathen that were in the stadium, and waved his hand to them, and groaning and looking up to heaven, he said, away with the atheist. So you see what he's done. He switched it up. He said, you're calling me an atheist, but I'm telling you that your old polytheistic system is nothing. It's empty. It is a true atheism. So he switches it up, and he points at the crowd and says, this is your atheism. I got your atheism right here. To continue. But when the magistrate pressed him hard and said, swear the oath and I will release you, revile the Christ, Polycarp said, 86 years have I been his servant, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king who saved me? And he goes on to be burned alive there. But the story and the account, and I've asked you to read it for a reason, because it's famous and because it's amazing. But read the account to see how that all plays out. But his is a very famous martyr story, and as is the passion of Perpetua and Felicity. Passion here, remember the movie The Passion of the Christ. Passion is not like I'm in love with these people. Passion is the technical meaning of the word passion is suffering. So it's the suffering of Perpetua and Felicity. Now these are women, not only women, these are young mothers. Perpetua was a noble woman with a young child. Felicity was her slave, pregnant when arrested, gave birth shortly before being led into the arena. So both of them have these young babies, and the church community that they end up leaving behind assimilate these babies, take care of these babies. They bring them into their community. But Perpetua and Felicity were part of a group of 5 Christians arrested to be killed. Again, kind of like Justin Martyr, Perpetua's father was a pagan. And he was desperate to see, and as you can imagine, he was desperate to see his daughter's life saved. So he desperately tries to free her. That doesn't work. He goes to her and says, you need to renounce Christ and be saved. This is madness. You can get out of here. All you have to do is say the magic words. But she wouldn't do it. And the account I've asked you to read a little bit from was thought to be written up by Church Father Tertullian. Again, it's a very famous account. And just to give you a little bit of it, they're brought in, and the text says, the populace shuddered as they saw one young woman of delicate frame, that'd be Perpetua, and another with breasts still dropping from her recent childbirth. And that would be Felicity, her slave. So these 2 women brought in, and the Romans are kind of looking at each other going, do we really want to do this? But they go on to do it. And they are brought in, again, it's a group of 5. They're brought in with some males. The males have lions turned on them. The females have wild cows and sows turned on them, which is interesting. Deserves its own study, I suppose. And then after the animals have had their way with these Christians, the Romans send in gladiators to finish them off. And there's a section from Perpetua's martyrdom. It says, but Perpetua, that she might taste some pain, being pierced between the ribs. So she'd been gored by one of these cows between the ribs, bleeding profusely, cried out loudly, and she herself placed the wavering right hand of the youthful gladiator to her throat. So you look at this, the wavering right hand, even the gladiator is going, are we really doing the right thing here? But she, according to the account, she takes his hand and puts it here. And then Tertullian goes on to say, possibly such a woman could not have been slain unless she herself had willed it, because she was feared by the impure spirit. And this is a common theme in these martyrdom stories, that these Christians are willingly giving themselves up, just as their Savior had done, and that there was definitely a spiritual battle going on. It's almost like the Roman people aren't necessarily the real enemy here. The real contest is with demonic powers, with Satan. And Perpetua even has a vision. I don't know if I asked you to read this bit or not, but she has a vision the night before all this happens. She has a vision of herself in the arena fighting with a mysterious figure who turns out to be the devil, and she's actually, she beats him up. She's victorious. So it was definitely a spiritual battle that was happening as these accounts were written up. But you see, McGrath makes mention of the role of the women in the church. You see the power Look at this. If you read this bit of Perpetua's narrative and the empowerment that she received, ironically enough, the empowerment that she received as a martyr, someone who is remembered and is made into a hero by the Christian Church, a fundamental member because of her courage in this martyrdom moment. And this is a common theme in these martyrdom stories, this unheard of, unbelievable courage by these really common, ordinary, lower class, margins of society people. Um, and they really catch the Romans, the larger Roman culture. Their courage really makes the larger Roman culture draw a breath a little bit and say, what do these people have going on that is so very different from how we would handle things? So you do have these martyrdom stories that are very famous. They've been challenged in recent years. There's a scholar in Notre Dame whose name is Candida Moss, who's written some stuff challenging the martyrdom stories because it almost seems in some ways they're too good to be true. But there has been, still the bulk of historical opinion says, yeah, there really were Christians who died for their faith. They died extraordinarily well, and their courage was one of the things that drew increasing numbers of the Roman Empire to the Christian faith. So among these other things we've already mentioned, the courage of the martyrs. You've heard the old saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. There seems to be, in these accounts, there seems to be something to that. So despite the martyrdom, or maybe because of it, the young movement prospers, and remember, McGrath says women are a large reason why. So you start to have this change. They were in a siege. McGrath says the church was in a siege mentality for a long time. But as the momentum for Christianity grows, it changes. And in 311, the Romans give up persecuting Christians. They say, look, as long as you just don't disturb the public order, fine, we're not going to kill you anymore. And then you have Constantine, who's the Christian emperor, and I have Christian in parentheses in my notes because no one is quite certain about how devout he really was. More than one scholar said, he basically was a political. He said, this is the horse that seems to be winning the race. I'm going to put my money on this horse. Sure, I'll become a Christian. It's politically advantageous for me to do so. And there are others that say, no, he actually was a legit Christian who just happened to be in this position. And there's lots of different opinions on it. But one thing that is unquestioned is the fact that when Constantine became emperor, the momentum that Christianity had been experiencing even before that was brought forward immensely. Because you have him and his conversion, he becomes Christian. And from that point on, Christianity goes from this despised minority to, hey, the emperor of the leader of our empire is part of this religion. I want to get on the good side of the leader of this empire. I think I'm going to become part of this religion too. And you see this mass movement towards Christianity. And then you have the Edict of Milan, which is a very famous moment in 313 CE. Christianity assuming a more public role in Rome, becoming more and more influential as it starts to become. It was something that was reserved for the margins of society, for the women, for the outsiders, for the people who were like less than ideal in ancient eyes. Now it kind of flips and it becomes, if you want to get along in society and you want to be success and you want to achieve, then this is how you do it. And it becomes more and more influential. There are bumps in the road, if you will. There's a guy called Julian the Apostate, who's a Roman Empire in the mid-4th century CE, tries to undo the progress Christianity has made and tries to restore the old paganism. His last words, his deathbed words, are reported to have been, "You have won, O Galilean." In other words, he couldn't do it. Paganism was dying, and Christianity was becoming the thing. But McGrath kind of hints at this, but a lot of people have written on it. There's a cost that's associated with this victory. Because on the surface, you're going, wow, for Christianity, that's great. They go from being killed to running the Roman Empire. Wow, that's amazing. The nature of the religion changes. When you are countercultural, when you operate under a siege mentality, as McGrath says, you practice your religion a certain way. You tend to be more committed. Even if it costs you something, you don't give up your religion. You hold on to it. As a result, you're more likely to act on behalf of that religion. You're more likely to be inspired by it. But if you're a member of the establishment religion and you are doing this, at least partly, in order to get on in society, you're going to be, to use a biblical term, you're going to be more lukewarm about it. You're not going to be willing to count the cost as much as someone who is in a countercultural, especially a hated, persecuted counterculture. So on the one hand, yeah, it's great. They become the establishment religion. On the other hand, it does change the nature of Christianity as it's commonly practiced in Rome. Not necessarily for the better. There's a lot of lukewarm, a lot of halfway, a lot of I am checking all the boxes so that people look and see that I'm a devout Christian, but really I'm just doing this to get on politically. And there are responses to this. There are revolts against this, and the primary revolt is in the form of what we call monasticism. So you have then, even though Christianity is entrenched as the dominant power religiously in the empire, you still have a large and growing contingent of people that say the establishment version of Christianity is not something I want any part of. I want to be part of a smaller, more committed community. So they withdraw from city life. They withdraw from the cities. They go off into the desert, into the wild places. Some go in solitude by themselves. Others go in groups. And you have these groups that form, and this is the foundation, the beginning of a monastic tradition, which carries on even to this day. I mean, if you've heard about monastic traditions, this is something that carries on even to this day, and it has its beginnings after Constantine, after the institutionalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire, because you have these monastics looking at Christianity as it's widely practiced, saying, this isn't it. We want a more authentic faith. We want a more committed faith. We want the type of Christianity they had when they were really suffering and they were really countercultural. So this is a countercultural movement, but instead of counterculture against Roman pagan whatever, it's a counterculture against weak, lukewarm Christianity. So you have that then. And I've asked you to read a couple of examples of monastic stuff, just small examples. I asked you to skim, you don't have to read the whole thing, but skim the sayings of the Desert Fathers, just to give you a flavor of what that type of wisdom looks like. I have one here on my notes, just it's representative. It says, Abba Isidore said, if you fast regularly, do not be inflated with pride, but if you think highly of yourself because of it, then you had better eat meat. It is better for a man to eat meat than to be inflated with pride and glorify himself. That's a common theme that runs through a lot of monastic writing, and it's a biblical theme too, obviously, but you also see it in places like Brother Lawrence and Thomas à Kempis, and here in the Desert Fathers, this sense, and the rule of Saint Benedict, this sense of humility, this sense of think less of yourself than you are inclined to do, and this is a common theme that comes up in the Desert Fathers. So again, it's this kind of, it's the stuff that a mainline kind of halfway lukewarm person would look at and say they're taking this to unhealthy extremes. That's what the monastics were looking for. But the monastic tradition goes on to produce, among others, St. Francis, who I asked you to read a little bit of him, just because everyone loves St. Francis and because you have a very wildly outside-the-box portrayal of Christian theology there. He's, in the Canticle of the Sun, which I've asked you to read, he has been called, Francis of Assisi has been called a sort of a Christian pantheist because he has such a high regard for non-human beings. Animals, the sun, the moon, the celestial beings. He sees all of it as God's beloved creation and acts in a way that is, again, the key word here I think is extreme compared to his predecessors. But you have lots of different, the monastic tradition is huge. We'll talk about this more next week because, Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk. You have a lot of things come from this tradition. And it's ironic because the tradition begins with the impulse of we want to pull away from sinful, distracted, lukewarm society, but in that pulling away, they produce a situation where they have a really profound impact on the world. And you have, just a quick example, the last two Catholic popes, Francis and Benedict, both named after monastic fathers. It's interesting that these popes and many others besides them took their name from monastic figures. It's very, very interesting. I think it speaks to the effect and the influence of this movement, even though it began really as kind of a separatist movement. But anyway, you have the monastics and you have the institutionalization of the church. The church grows, but in the context of the Roman Empire kind of disintegrating. And the church becomes a strong point, becomes a bulwark, if you will, in a world full of turmoil. And I mentioned Augustine already. Um, Emblematic of the period, the greatest church father. He's a bridge between the patristic and the medieval periods. And his whole thing, and I asked you to read his conversion story because it's famous and because it's beautiful and because so much of Christianity afterwards has been influenced by his creation story. Because he was one of the first to really examine the nature of the will. And his whole theme that he keeps coming back around to again and again and again is the idea of sin is a disordered will. I need to will, I need to love God and then let the rest of it. We mentioned first things, second things. He's the father of that. And I mentioned the city of God already, and he is in the midst of this turmoil, in the midst of the Roman Empire collapsing, in the midst of society basically disintegrating around the church. He draws this distinction between the city of God, which is the church on earth, and the city of man. And he says the city of man is flawed and perfect, it's fallen. The city of God is the manifestation of God on earth, God's community on earth. And he is one of the first to use the language that, look, we are merely travelers here. We are temporary pilgrims. We are looking for our real home. We are citizens of a foreign country, if you will. We are citizens of the city of God. Our citizenry is not here, but we're here. What are we supposed to be doing here? Well, we're supposed to help. We're supposed to lend a hand towards the common good while we travel, while we make our way towards our true home, which is the city of God, which is manifested in heaven. Um, Very, very common language, especially in evangelical circles. It really gets its start with Augustine. So he's a major, major, major figure. Can't overstate how important he is. But he is a bridge into the Middle Ages and the medieval period. And the medieval period, you have the development of the institutionalization of Christianity, basically. You have become from a revolutionary movement to more of an institutionalized cultural entity, this thing. How do you do that? Well, you build schools, you build structures, and this is where the scholasticism movement comes. And McGrath talks a lot about this, and I'll refer you to his section for reading. A name you've got to know that comes up in McGrath's work is Thomas Aquinas. If you don't know who Aquinas is, read McGrath's little portrait of him. I almost made you read some Aquinas, but I decided against it. I decided that you had enough. But he is, especially in Catholic circles, even today, he is a doctor of the church. I mean, he is one of the top 3 or 4 most fundamental theologians, influential theologians of all time, including Paul. He is just massively important. And he comes from this scholastic period of the Middle Ages. And his world, the world that Thomas inherits and lives in, is a world going through changes. Why is it going through changes? Well, because of outside impulses, outside influences. And you have competing influences within Christianity. You have Eastern and Western and the tensions there. The Christian world expands and questions arise as to the right way to do things. And there are sharp cultural disagreements between the Western and the Eastern manifestations of the church. And it really culminates in the Great Schism of 1054, which is the birth of the Orthodox Church. You have the Western Christian personified by Rome, the Eastern Christian personified by Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul and Turkey. And you have profound differences in the way in which they see things. And these differences can't be resolved, and they end up splitting. And that happens in 1054, and there's a lot. And McGrath goes into more detail here, but you have, as the church becomes more influential, as you make a pass from the Christian movement into sort of a Christendom, kingdom, again, politically entrenched, institutionalized Christianity, you have a lot of problems. And then another problem that you run into is conflict between Christendom and other civilizations, most notably Islam, expands. And the most famous after effect of that division, of that collision, I should say, is the Crusades. And so much has been written on the Crusades. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. Again, I'll refer you to McGrath's portrait of the Crusades. Generally regarded, and I think rightfully so, as a black mark on the history of Christianity. It is a lot more complicated oftentimes than it's made out to be. It wasn't just Christians acting badly. although that was part of it. It was a manifestation, I think, of this kind of Constantinian state religion type of mindset. Um, when something is baptized as the state religion, um, the expectation is that you will go along and get along with that religion, with that tradition. And it's easy to think here, at least for me, it's easy to think here of the difference. When you have the pilgrims and you have the travelers from the old world in Europe to the new world in America, one of the first decisions they make is there will be no state religion here, because they had seen where this road ends. And oftentimes it ends in division, it ends in conflict, it ends in stuff that's really kind of foreign to the original vision of Christianity as it's portrayed in the life of Jesus, as it's portrayed in the scriptures, um, that type of thing. So this is a massive simplification of a lot of history, but for our intents and purposes, we're going to leave off here at the medieval period, post-Crusades, where you have the institutional church in quite a bit of crisis. Um, kind of drowning in its own excess, drowning in its own weakness, needing a jolt, needing a jump start. And next week we'll talk about Martin Luther and being a fundamental part of that jump start. And again, he comes from the monastic tradition. He's an Augustinian monk. Um, so he comes from this tradition. And again, his effect and his influence is just massive. But we'll talk about that next week. But this is a lot of history and not much time. But it'll give you a flavor of kind of the direction and the way in which the story of the church took off.